Today we're going to look at how to solve a quadratic equation by completing the squared. You guys can see the steps on this column, the third column. You can pause the video and look at the steps, but I'm going to do a couple of those examples. Right, so the first example, you want to solve by completing the squared. One of the steps is, the first step is to have the variables on the same side. So you're looking at the x and the x squared. They are on the same side. They're not in order. Standard form, you always want to have the x with the squared first. So let's switch those orders, those two terms. I'm not going to change the sign. I'm not doing anything to the signs. If you have a number next to the x, make sure you take that to the other side. That's why we have a 45 on the right side. When you complete the squared, you want a to equal to 1. And if you want to know if completing the square is a good option to use, look at the value of b. When b is even, you can use a completing the squared. If it's odd, you guys are going to get fractions, so a different method is better to use. Now, to make the value of a equal to 1, whatever number you have here, you just factor that out. If you have a negative, you factor that out too. So let me take out the 3 here. So we have an x squared, 18 divided by 3, that's 6, and equal to 45. We want to complete the squared inside of the parentheses. Notice the a is 1, b is even, so let's go ahead and find c. That's what we're missing to complete the squared. So to find c, you take the value of b divided by 2 and you square it. You simplify the expression, so that's 3 squared equals 9. This number here, which is c, you are going to add to both sides of the equation. So you bring down the 3, the one we factor out, you bring down the x squared, you bring down the 6x, and you are going to add plus the 9. That's on the left side. On the right side, we have to be careful because if you factor out a number, you're going to have to carry that to the other side. So let me go ahead and bring down the 45 first. So there's the 45. Positive 3, that's the one we factor out, and you multiply by 9, which is the c value that we found. But make sure that if you factor out a number, you bring that 2 to the other side. This trinomial here is a perfect squared trinomial. We made it that way when we completed the square. So what you want to do is write it as a binomial squared. You bring down the 3 here, you have a binomial squared. So the binomial, you write down the variable, and a good shortcut you can use is the number that goes here is the number before you square it when you find the c. So this is positive 3, so plus 3 is here. Over here, you are going to simplify. So all of this right here, when you simplify, you will get 72. Now, we want to solve. It says solve by using completing the square. So, in order to solve, since we have a squared, we can use the square root rule. But before we do that, we need to get rid of the numbers outside of the parentheses. So to get rid of this 3, you just divide by 3. So this turns into a 1. So we're going to have x plus 3 with the squared, and 72 divided by 3 is 24. Now that you don't have any numbers outside of the parentheses, you can cancel the square. So you take the square root of both sides. Whatever you do to the left side, you do it to the other side. So the square root and the squared are opposite from each other, so they cancel. You bring down what's inside of the parentheses, and when you take the square root of a number, make sure that you always write plus and minus, first of all, when you solve. Check the radicand is not negative, because if you have a negative inside, you are going to need imaginary numbers. So we don't need any here, but you can simplify. If you can break down the 24. Two numbers are multiplied to 24, and one of those numbers is a perfect square number, is 4 times 6. 4 is a perfect square number. So let me continue on this side. So we do have x plus 3. We do have a plus and a minus. The square root of 4 is 2. And you keep the radical square root of 6. X is not by itself, it's not, so let's subtract 3 from both sides, cancels. Now on this side, the 2 and the 3 are not like terms. 3 doesn't have a radical, and they must have the same radical in order to be like terms. But they don't have, 3 doesn't have any, so you write that number down with no radical first, and then you have the 2 square root of 6. So here are the zeros. Remember, keep in mind, make sure that you don't have a negative inside. If you do, you must use imaginary numbers. So let's try another one. So the second example here, it says you want to write the function in vertex form and identify its vertex. Now this is not solving, but when you have standard form and you want to write it in vertex form, you must complete the square. So it's a good example and to practice completing the square. So the name of the function, f of x, first change that to a 0. We're going to let f of x, this equal to 0. Everything else is the same. To complete the square, we must have the variables on the same side. So the x and the x squared are on the same side, but this number must go. So I'm going to subtract 2. So we have negative 2 x squared minus 4x. This cancels. When you have the variables on the same side, you can start completing the squared. Remember that a has to equal to 1. If a is 1, that's fine. You just find c, and whatever c is, you add to both sides. But since this is not 1, let's factor this out, and notice it has a negative. So I'm going to factor out the negative with the 2. And when you factor out a negative, remember to change the signs of the expression and factor out the number. So this turns into positive x squared. Negative becomes positive, change the sign. 4 divided by 2 is 2x. On this side we have a negative 2. So now we're going to complete the square. Notice a is 1, b is even, so to find c, you take the value of b divided by 2 and you square it. So that's going to equal to 1 squared, which equals 1. So this is the number you're going to add to both sides. So I bring down the negative 2 here, minus 2. Remember the number we factor out, you bring it down as well. So minus 2, and you multiply by the c value. That's the one we found to complete the square. On the other side, you bring down the negative 2, you have the x squared plus 2x, and you bring down, you add the 1. So you are going to simplify this, add, combine terms. So that's negative 2 minus 2 times 1, that's negative 4. On the other side, we bring down the negative 2. This trinomial is a perfect square trinomial. That's why you made it when you complete the square. So you want to write it as a binomial square. So you keep the variable and you add, you write down the number before you square it. If this number is negative, you put minus the number. But right now it's positive 1 plus 1. And remember, we're not solving, so we are not going to use the square root. We want to write it in vertex form. So the next step is just take this number back to the other side. So plus 4, and this, guys, is going to be the value of k in the vertex form. We have h and k, so do not add the 2 and the 4, don't combine. Just put it at the end of the function. So let me write down over here. This cancels, and I'm going to go back to the name of the function, which is f of x. Instead of having 0, I'm going to go back to the name. We have a negative 2 x plus 1 squared, 4. So that is vertex form. Now, we do want to identify the vertex. So I'm going to put a V for vertex. And to find the vertex, we just need H and K. So when you have the vertex form, the number inside of the parentheses is H. Make sure you change the sign. So -1. And K is the one at the end, outside of the parentheses. The one at the end, and that's +4. Keep the sign. This number here is A, -2, which is the same one as in the standard form. Standard form has a -2A, so we must have the same A. They're the same parabola. So we do have vertex form here, and this is the standard.